So I'm never gonna dance again the way I dance with you. Oh, I can already tell I'm gonna get some hate for this one. Yes, fill me with your hate. So, welcome to episode 2 in my album sales history first week sales series, where I outline and analyze different artists' album sales history post 1991, which of course was when Nielsen SoundScan was invented and they started tracking individual album sales in the United States. So, because SoundScan is an American album sales tracking firm, I focus predominantly on US first week sales numbers, but throughout my research, if I come across any other interesting facts and figures on worldwide sales, I also do my best to include those. Now, for those that don't know me, I started in the music industry at the age of 14, playing for the band Apothecary, and I also play guitar for the band Hatchet now as well in the San Francisco Bay Area. So for the last 10 years, I've been pretty immersed in the heavy metal music industry anyway. I love numbers, facts, figures, and all things related to the business side of the music industry. So I've constantly paid attention to the growth and decline of different bands and trends and scenes and things like that. And I've definitely annoyed a lot of my friends and loved ones with my analysis of different patterns and trends within the music industry. So now I get to do this, and hopefully I get to stop bugging them so much. Thank you for volunteering. So as an artist, obviously some numbers are crucially important. Most people pay attention to them. These are things like social media clout, Facebook likes, Instagram followers, YouTube views. There are things like concert ticket sales, how many people are coming to see you, obviously. And my favorite, which is obviously the reason why we're here today, is the first week sales figures. Now, a nice analogy I like to use as to why first week sales are important, it's like the opening weekend box office score for a movie when it just comes out. You're not gonna see more interest in a product typically than you do right around the release of that product, especially in the entertainment industry. It's a good barometer. First week sales numbers, as well as box office opening weekend, it's a good barometer to assess how large a release is and how relevant it is to the public and to its respective fan base. Oh, Disturbed. Well, I don't even want to call them a guilty pleasure because they were like the band that really got me into heavier music. Up until The Sound of Silence, people either loved or hated Disturbed. Before they were like this pseudo household name with the success of that cover, the people that knew Disturbed either loved them for what they were, or they were constantly making fun of David Draymond's vocals. Actually, you know what? I'm pretty sure everybody, fan or not, makes fun of the noise. Like, we've all done it. We've all made the noise. Maybe I'll make it at the end of the video, who knows? So, for those of you that do know me, you're probably aware that I am a fan of Disturbed, a pretty big one at that. My first tattoo was actually the Believe symbol. It's that guy. That guy right there. That was my first tattoo, right about there. Most people that know it are also fans of the band, so a lot of the times I'll get people to come up to me and they're like, "Hey dude, cool tattoo," and I'm always like, shh, 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 shh. Nobody needs to know. So the reason that I'm a huge fan is the same reason that a lot of people in my generation are fans of Disturbed. It's that I was born in the mid-90s. I was born in 1994, and the first time I heard Down with the Sickness, I was about 6 years old, and it blew my mind. He had me at oh wah, and I was hooked from the very first I'd even spent my awkward, overweight adolescent years drawing that symbol on all of my notebooks and everything in school that I could. Prayer off of the album Believe was actually the most played song on my iPod in middle school. I think it had just over 200 plays. So, now that you know a little bit more about me, let's get into the Fab Four of the early aughts of hard rock. So Disturbed formed officially in 1994, spending the first 2 years of their career David Draymondless and performing under the name Brawl, which I can only assume was in reference to the Super Smash Bros. Melee sequel, which was a really good game and a really good name for a band, actually. So after a couple of demos, Disturbed got signed to Giant/Reprise Records because that's how easy it was to get signed pre-2004. Pre-social media, really. So The Sickness was released on March 7th of the year 2000 and peaked at number 29 on the Billboard charts 6 months after its release. Now, The Sickness remains their best-selling album of all time, with over 5 million copies sold in the United States alone since its release, but for the life of me, I cannot find any first-week sales information about that album. I can't even find their first-week chart position. But there's a reason for that, you see. The Sickness didn't chart on the Billboard 200 when it was released. I checked the Billboard archives online for both the weeks of March 11th and March 18th, and no Sickness to be found anywhere on it. This probably just means that their record label didn't even bother reporting the sales figures because they were too embarrassingly low for anybody to care. Which I'm sure by 2019 standards, whatever those sales numbers were, they probably would have charted in like the top 100 today, because I think it only takes like 7 or 8 copies of an album to get onto the charts now. Now, The Sickness actually didn't make it onto the Billboard 200 until 2 months after its release. They saw their first ever appearance on the Billboard 200 at number 191 the week of May 13th, 2000. But by the week of May 13th, No Strings Attached by NSYNC had already been number 1 on the charts for like 6 weeks, so really, who fucking cares? Who even cared about Disturbed in 2000? We had NSYNC back then, man. However, the week of 10/21/2000, which was the week that Disturbed peaked with The Sickness at number 29, the number 1 album in the country that week was Radiohead's Kid A. Green Day's Warning was number 4 on the charts that week, which was a debut, and Human Clay by Creed was number 8 on that chart that week, with 54 weeks on the charts up until that point. That basically means that for 54 weeks in the year 2000, Human Clay by Creed was like top 10 popular in our country. Man, what a different world it was 19 years ago. Well, there you go, though. I might not have been able to find Disturbed's first week sales figure for their first record, but at least I got to annoy you with some Creed facts. Oh, and by the way, Human Clay, when it did debut, hit number 1 with 315,000 copies in a week. Creed! That's how much we used to like them. So anyway, next is my personal favorite Disturbed album, obviously, which is Believe. Album number 2 was put out like a fire on a menorah, September 17th, 2002. Now clearly the world was starting to sign on to this whole ooh-ah-ah business, because Believe hit number 1 on the Billboard charts with over 284,000 copies sold. Now imagine you put out an album that nobody really liked at first, and then all of a sudden people started buying it. And then you put out your next album and it goes to number 1. That's basically what happened. The Sickness was a good album, and then people bought the next one. It's logic. It makes sense. So finally, Chin Piercing & Co. had some actual numbers and a solid fan base to back them up. They were officially a major force in the music industry. So obviously The Sickness ended up being a huge success, which in turn made Believe the immediate success that it was, but I would conjecture that Disturbed basically made themselves popular the old-fashioned way, by word of mouth, self-promotion, and touring. Yeah, I mean, they had a major label behind them, but it's pretty clear that they were an afterthought. Even potentially a tax write-off when they got signed. And that is evidenced by the lack of first week sales for The Sickness, because obviously it wasn't a very well marketed record when it first came out, otherwise it would have better numbers, right? I'm just saying, clearly they were like 0 marketing dollars allocated to The Sickness. Oh sure, they kinda sound like Limp Bizkit and Korn and these other bands. Let's just take a chance and see if they make it on their own. So anyway, Prayer, 12-year-old Clayton's favorite song ever, is actually their second highest charting single of their entire career, only being dethroned in 2016 when, of course, The Sound of Silence beat Prayer, I think by like 14 points, and it put it at number 42 on the Hot 100. So if you really think about it, Prayer is Disturbed's technically their highest charting song, because it's their song that they wrote, versus The Sound of Silence obviously being a cover. None of this cover business. Only songs you wrote counts in this video, my friend. And Prayer, you take the prize. Go figure, my favorite Disturbed song is like also their most popular song. I'm such a freaking poser. Also, anybody else remember Liberate being in Tony Hawk's Underground 2? For real? I mean, God, like, Tony Hawk always had badass soundtracks, but like Underground 2 really took the cake. Black Label by Lamb of God, Midlife Crisis, Faith No More, Whiplash, Metallica. It was just otherworldly. It was so good, and it got me into so many freaking bands. Seriously, I need to find out who specifically the music director was on these games, or that game in particular, because you seriously deserve a high five from a generation of kids that got into heavy music. You know, I would absolutely say, as far as like influential games getting kids into heavier music, it would be Tony Hawk and Guitar Hero And that's it. Like, that is what made that generation of metal, like, popular. I definitely know I probably wouldn't be as into metal as I am right now if it weren't for those games. So, yeah, definitely Tony Hawk, Guitar Hero, and Viva La Bam. For show. So anyway, Believe went double platinum in the year 2008 and presumably still sits in that range between 2 and 3 million because no information exists on the internet that says otherwise and nobody buys records anymore. So, okay, bye. All right, so now we're in 2005 and to celebrate my graduation from the 5th grade, Disturbed decided to release the album 10,000 Fists. Almost 3 years to the day from the release of Believe, 10,000 Fists hit stores on September 20th, 2005. 10K Fisties hit number 1 on the Billboard charts with a first week sales number of 239,000. Now that's a great number, but it's about a 45,000 copy decrease from Believe. So why is that? Now I think there are a few factors here. So Disturbed have never really been media darlings, but some publications really tore this album a new poop shoot. Rolling Stone gave it a 2 out of 5, and NME from the UK gave it a 1 out of 10. Ouch. Now my theory is that when The Sickness came out, Disturbed were like the little train that could, right? And then it started blowing up, and everybody wanted to be on the bandwagon, right? Because it's cool to be the first people on the bandwagon. Disturbed were like the new kid on the block with a cool new record, and everybody wanted to be a part of it. Then as you get more popular, of course, the hipsters don't want to like you anymore. Happens all the time to anything that's ever gotten popular since the dawn of time. So then Believe comes out, and Disturbed kind of went from this like industrial-tinged, new metal, contemporary sort of, oh, puppy. Hey, come here. Hey. Come here. Where are you? There you are. Want to say hi to the camera? Want to say hi to the camera? Oh, I love you. Oh, buddy. I'm a good boy. Okay, bye. Sorry about that. So Believe comes out, and Disturbed kind of goes from this, like, industrial-tinged, new metal, alternative amalgam that can hang with like their more popular contemporaries, to a more focused, radio-friendly, 3.5-minute sort of rock song band. Now usually bands get to collect their sellout card for a move like this, but I feel like Disturbed's sound was sort of unique enough to where that didn't really hit them as hard as it would other bands. And obviously it wasn't a huge deal when they did go back and record 10,000 Fists, because that album was much more in line with The Sickness than it was with Believe. But by 2005, nu metal was like deader than dead, and it's entirely possible that music journalists wanted Disturbed to just die with the trend, you know? Oh. Sorry, doggo cameo. He's such a good boy, I love him so much. Doggo cameo. Hopefully you guys didn't notice how short my shirt is. Okay, where was my ass? So by 2005, nu metal was like deader than dead, and it's entirely possible that music journalists kind of wanted Disturbed to die with the trend too, even though they were only ever like loosely associated with the trend at best. It's also plausible that Believe sort of turned off Disturbed's real hardcore fans, so that by the time they put out 10,000 Fists, those fans had already kind of written them off as like radio nonsense. Also in the mid-aughts, heavy music kind of went back to the underground too. Between nu metal being killed off and like just before the new wave of American heavy metal was really thriving, which actually at that point helps me explain the next sales figure that we're about to get into. Oh, and also 10K Fisties is double platinum in the United States, and Stricken was by far one of my favorite songs to play on Guitar Hero ever. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about the next two records because not only are they not my favorite, I'm pretty sure they're like nobody's favorite. And the video's getting kind of long, so I gotta cut corners somewhere. Sorry, Disturbed. So Indestructible album number 4 was released on June 3rd of 2008. And like the previous two records, it debuted at number 1 on the Billboard 200 with first week sales of 253,000. That's about a 14,000 unit increase from the previous record. They're showing that they're consistent and their fan base seems to be aging with them at this point, right? Now, I don't necessarily think that this record sold more because the music was better per se, though it did have a couple of good songs. The Night and Inside the Fire were alright, but not for me. Now, obviously Disturbed hit their sales peak with Believe back when like that, you know, post-grungy rock alternative stuff was really, really popular. And then they kind of settled back into their niche sound. So I feel like this album sold better than 10,000 Fists based on 3 things. One was the success of 10,000 Fists. Two was great marketing, with an example being that Disturbed partnered with Hot Topic and gave away like free album teasers and things like that when people bought Disturbed merch. And three, and most importantly, there was a renewed youth interest in heavy music around 2008. You know, again, you had Guitar Hero and Tony Hawk, and plus you had MySpace at its peak level of influence around this time. And Disturbed took advantage of that in a few different ways. They even live streamed a concert on MySpace before live streaming was like the norm. They did this 11 years ago. They connected with youth culture so well at the time that I really feel like this brought in an entire new generation of kids that weren't with them since the beginning. And I should know because that's exactly where I was in 2008. I was graduating the 8th grade and just starting high school. MySpace was everything, scene music was everywhere, and Disturbed fit the edgy, rebellious puberty tropes like perfectly at the time. Plus they had well-written catchy songs that anybody could latch onto. Now 14,000 unit increase isn't really a whole lot to warrant this long of an explanation about this, but it's really important to remember that worldwide music sales had been declining pretty steadily for the previous 10 years since about 1999. And typically once a band's sales start to dip, it's usually a sign of a lot worse things to come, as we're going to see next. And I'm never gonna dance again. Guilty feet have got no rhythm. I'm reading the prompter. That's why it's difficult for me to do these videos. There's a lot of editing involved. I have to go like sentence by sentence because like I can't read very well because I'm blind. And I have my laptop like sitting like right here, like right next to me, and I still can't see this at all. Like it's I have to say a sentence and then like squint over like this and then come back and like say another sentence. Oh my god. I'm not gonna be a good YouTuber at all. So, album number 5, Asylum. Definitely, by far, my least favorite Disturbed record. I couldn't even name like a single song before I was doing this research. And to be honest, since I've done the research, it's been probably a week since I did my research for this. And I totally forgot every single name to every song that's on that record. Like, that's how unremarkable it was, and that's how much I, like, just don't care about it at all. And I'm a big fan, too, which is like, so funny, because I'm pretty sure, like, I was in high school when this record came out, and I was, like, pretty into music, and I still just blew this one off, like, didn't even care. I guess at the time, you know, when I was 15, 16 years old, I had just outgrown them or something. And I was basically their target demographic, as I kind of explained before, that, like, angsty young person. But clearly I'm a pretty good archetype for what I'm talking about as far as like people outgrowing them around that time period. Because while Asylum did debut at #1 on the Billboard charts, it did so with only 179,000 copies on August 31st of 2010. Now I know I say, oh, only 179,000 copies, like it's not a good number, it's a great number. But a 75,000 unit drop in just 2 years between albums is like too significant to ignore. That's like a lot of numbers, man! Now obviously Disturbed were still like a huge mainstream rock band with tons of radio play, and they were gonna have a big sales week regardless, right? But seeing this huge taper is obviously a sign of things to come. So anyway, songs weren't great. The kids that loved them in middle school now saw them as like cringy in high school. And Disturbed ended up going on a hiatus right after this album was released, and they went on, like, I think a tour or two. Asylum is actually also their worst-selling album, with exception to the new one, which obviously was just released a few months ago, so I'm not really including that one. But yeah, Asylum actually only went gold, and it's their only album to only go gold, with the exception of course, the new album. Ironically, it's also their most critically acclaimed album. Like, go figure, the album that critics like is the album that fans don't really care for, you know? Go figure, music journalists and fans don't agree on something, right? So anyway, Immortalized was released on August 21st, 2015, after their hiatus. And it debuted at, you guessed it, #1 on the Billboard charts, but it did so with only 98,000 units in its first week. That is no bueno. #1, sure, great, yeah, but at the time it was their worst first week sales number of their career, with the exception of The Sickness, which of course they weren't a big band until after that album's release. Immortalized also marked their 5th consecutive #1 studio album, a feat only achieved by 2 other bands in history, one being Dave Matthews Band, and 2 being the band I did my first album sales history video on, Metallica. So bittersweet, I'm sure. Low sales number, but you're still breaking records. Now, like I said, album sales had been on a general decline since around 1998, 1999 when it was like at peak. But album sales really tanked hard in the 20 teens. Coupled with a 5-year hiatus and a lukewarm response to the first 2 singles they released off of Immortalized, it's no wonder why they had an 81,000 unit loss. That's like almost 50%, dog. That's like a lot of loss. That's like if you had a job and your job was to like sell tater tots and you sold like 180,000 tots and then like you have a job for 5 years and then like all of a sudden you're only selling 80,000 tots, like your boss is not going to be happy with you because you're supposed to be getting better, not worse. You know what I mean? So it's like maybe people just don't like tater tots anymore, or maybe your tater tots aren't as good as they used to be, or maybe people think your tater tots are bland, and maybe your tater tots used to be really cool, but now there's just so many other tater tots that are like way better. They just have more options in tater tots. I don't know. I mean, I guess as a whole, people don't really, purchase tater tots anymore. They just kind of like rent them online. Nobody likes to own tater tots anymore. They just like to stream them on the internet. So it's like, I mean, it's harder to sell tater tots now than it was 5 years ago, sure, but yeah, this analogy's getting weird. Plus, like I said in the Metallica video, rock music was sort of declining in popularity in general. But then a savior rose from the dead. The Holy Spirit descended from the heavens in the form of Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel and bequeathed upon the world the most overplayed and overrated cover in the history of recorded music. I swear to God, if I hear the sound of silence one more time, I'm just gonna... Sorry about that. So anyway, The Sound of Silence was released as a single, and single-handedly, see what I did there? Catapulted Disturbed back into the public consciousness. All of a sudden, Disturbed were just kind of everywhere again. They were performing on late-night television shows, they were on every radio station you could think of, they were being heard everywhere you could go. 20 years into their, like, hard rock, heavy metal career, Disturbed finally had a crossover hit in the form of a freaking Simon and Garfunkel cover. You know what? Maybe I do want to go back to the year 2000 now. Hashtag make Disturbed sick again. So this cover, in addition to making Disturbed completely relevant again, is also solely responsible for Immortalized becoming a platinum album. It really is insane just how big this song was, this cover. Sometimes I still don't understand it. And I know I sound like I hate it, but it really is a great cover. They did an incredible job with it. I really do think that. It's just like, once you hear it 100 times in a row, it just becomes any other earworm pop song that makes you want to jump in front of a form of public transit. So you'd think that having such a successful hit under your belt would lead to a drastic increase in sales, right? I mean, obviously it helped with the album that the cover was on. Well, you're wrong. Evolution, Disturbed's newest album, came out just a few months ago on October 19th, 2018. It sold just 71,000 copies in its first week. Evolution also broke their consecutive #1 streak, stopping them at 5 studio albums because this album only debuted at #4 on the Billboard charts, which is actually a lot to my surprise. I totally did figure that the success of The Sound of Silence really would have pushed Disturbed back up the charts. But upon further consideration, I totally get it. Not only do we live in like a singles world now where it doesn't matter so much who sings the song as how catchy it is and how repetitive it is, but The Sound of Silence was totally a one-off. It's a cover. It's not Disturbed. The mainstream that embraced The Sound of Silence would never embrace actual Disturbed. This is the mainstream that listens to Rihanna or Taylor Swift or whoever is topping the pop charts at the time. The Sound of Silence was just a good, well-performed, sad song for when normal people need a good cry. And actually, the strong vocal performance and string arrangements on their cover of The Sound of Silence really brings the song closer to, like, Let It Go off of the Frozen soundtrack than it does bring it closer to, like, the rest of Disturbed's catalog. I mean, really, that song is way closer to Let It Go than it is to Down with the Sickness. And that's painfully obvious when you give it more than a second of thought. It showcases David at what he really is, which is an amazing singer, but it's still not a Disturbed song at all. And what irritates me more is that they clearly let the success of that song dictate the writing on Evolution. Almost half of the record are ballads, like you're pandering to the mainstream because they liked a cover? Now, I totally understand trying to replicate success, but it feels really insincere because the success wasn't their song. And at the end of the day, I'm actually kind of unsure if The Sound of Silence prevented Disturbed from having an even lower first week sales week, or if it just alienated their core fan base and made them not want to purchase records. Some of you might remember they did an online poll when they were going to release the first single off of Evolution, and they asked fans if they wanted a heavy song first or a ballad first. Well, the heavy song won because actual fans were voting, not radio fans, not Mom that cut their performance on Conan the night before and said, "Oh, I love Simon and Garfunkel, they did a great job." But real, actual Disturbed fans were voting on this. I'd actually really be willing to bet that the success rate of like people that heard The Sound of Silence, looked up Disturbed, and actually liked the rest of their discography is like less than 1 in 5. And I'm not even saying I don't like Evolution. I do like the album. It's a good, well-written album. You know, maybe I am just being like a little too harsh. I just can't stand hearing The Sound of Silence over and over and over again. And you know what's complete horseshit? You wanna know what the real Sound of Silence is? That's The Sound of Silence. You wanna know what Sound of Silence is again? You're wrong, Disturbed. You're wrong, Simon and Garfunkel. That's not The Sound of Silence. Hey guys, so thanks so much for watching my video. I had a great time doing all this research and putting all this stuff together. I have great ideas for what bands I want to do next, and if you have any ideas for what bands you want to see me do next, then drop a comment below and I will check it out. If you did like the video, maybe you could show support in the form of like a like, or maybe even a subscribe, or possibly a share. I don't know, whatever you feel like doing. I would love to do this more often, and with enough subscribers I could make that a reality, so why not go for it? Let's try it out and see what happens. Thanks y'all! I love you.
You're such a fucking hoe, I love it. You're such a fucking hoe.